good afternoon, or good morning if you're tuning in from the West Coast. My name is Dr. Amy Patterson, and I'm Chief Science Advisor at the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to this webinar on our new funding opportunity announcements for multi-site trials in Phase 2 and above. As you're going to hear today, these new FOAs are a pivotal element in our ongoing effort to optimize our clinical trial enterprise. And our goal is to work with you to help you prepare the very best applications possible and to plan and manage trials for success. Before introducing the other presenters and reviewing today's program, I'd like to turn the proceedings over to Amola Surya. She's going to provide you with a few tips on using the WebEx conferencing software so that you can get the most out of today's experience. Amola?
Thank you, Dr. Patterson. All lines will be in listen-only mode throughout the webinar, but please ensure your phone or mic is also muted from your side. If you experience any technical difficulties, such as not being able to hear or view the presentation, then you may contact us at any time by typing into the Q&A box on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Submit your issue to the host from the drop-down menu. If you need live captioning, please refer to the Media Viewer pod. To close the captions, click on the arrow next to the Media Viewer text to minimize this pod. We anticipate participants will have many questions that can be submitted throughout in order of receipt, but we will give priority to new topics not raised by previous questions. Selected questions will be read aloud, and panelists will answer them orally. We'll collect all remaining questions and use them to update our frequently asked questions. All registrants will be notified of their availability. Again, all lines will remain in listen-only mode through the question and answer session. To submit your content-related questions, please type into the Q&A box, again located on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Submit your question and select all panelists from the drop-down menu. And now back to Dr. Patterson.
Thank you, Mola. So with that, we'll return to the body of our program. My co-presenters today are senior officials from NHLBI. They each had a major role in spearheading the effort to develop the new FOAs for multi-site clinical trials. And they are Dr. Carrie Cope, who is a scientific review officer with NHLBI Division of Extramural Research Activities, Dr. Simone Glynn, who is chief of the Blood Epidemiology and Clinical Therapeutics branch in the NHLBI Division of Blood Diseases and Resources, and Dr. Eve Rosenberg, who is chief of the Atherothrombosis and Coronary Artery Disease branch in the NHLBI Division of Cardiovascular Sciences. For our program, I'll start us off by providing a brief overview of the Institute's ongoing efforts to optimize its clinical trial enterprise, and then we'll turn to our three co-chairs who will review in detail the new milestone-driven approach to the multi-site clinical trial FOAs. And after that, we'll have ample time for your questions. So now I'll turn to the first segment of the program, talk about our clinical trial optimization efforts, which hopefully will provide you with an important context for the impetus for developing these FOAs and some of the main features. I think all of us, both participating by phone and here in the room, appreciate that NHLBI investigators and research participants have a shared goal. We all hope that the clinical trials that we support, conduct, or participate in are going to produce interpretable, timely, and useful results, be they positive or negative, that at the end of the day inform prevention, diagnosis, or treatment of heart, lung, blood, and sleep disorders. And in fact, together, we've successfully partnered on hundreds of clinical trials over the years that have quite literally shaped medical practice and improved the health of millions of patients. But even with such success, we realize that there are opportunities for improvement. You are well aware of the many challenges that trials encounter. These include difficulties that delay trial launch, including regulatory hurdles, challenges in accruing sufficient number of participants, difficulties in contracting, potentially cost overruns, and a diminishing clinical trial workforce. And because sometimes trials take an extra time to get launched, there may actually have been changes in the clinical trial landscape that affect whether or not the trial remains in equipoise. The challenges facing clinical trials we recognize are not unique to the NHLBI trial portfolio, but instead have been widely recognized by academic, industry, and governmental groups, both here in the U.S. as well as abroad. The increasingly complex environment at the local, national, and international levels have raised the cost of conducting trials, and in a number of people's view, actually jeopardizes the ability to effectively conduct trials. Now, various deliberative groups with a lot of expertise are endeavoring to better understand and address some of these challenges, and we want to remain cognizant of and participate in those efforts to the extent that we can, but we also realize that the Institute has an important opportunity to do what it can in its own backyard, so to speak, to enhance and facilitate the trials within our own portfolio. The first step toward this goal is to take a look at how we solicit, review, and monitor our trials. And ultimately, we want to work with you to achieve a state where all NHLBI-supported trials address major, compelling scientific questions, yield interpretable, timely, and useful results, routinely take risks into account and appropriately manage them, have contingency plans, and disseminate trial results broadly and in a timely fashion. In addition, we strive to be an efficient learning organization, and we hope to take an empiric and evidence-based approach as we look toward improving our policies and practices. Therefore, it's going to be critical that we collect and analyze data regarding the impact of any changes that we make so that we can then have that data inform future titration or adjustment of our processes, including, as a matter of fact, these new FOAs. And finally, in this regard, we hope to be very transparent and communicate to you, our research community, any lessons that we learn by analyzing the impact of our policies and changes. We also recognize that the success of our efforts to optimize our trial enterprise ultimately hinges on input by key stakeholders. And a critical starting point for our efforts was to gather information from multiple perspectives about the most salient opportunities as well as the challenges facing clinical trials. We conducted a broad consultation and analysis encompassing, as you might expect, key reports, a review of the literature, but also formal consultation with the scientific community and public. And toward those ends, we issued a request for information last fall. This RFI explicitly invited community input on how best to optimize our trial enterprise, what were key features of a successful clinical trial, performance milestones, and we received quite robust feedback which has helped inform the development of these FOAs. In addition, and importantly, our NHLBI Advisory Council has a working group specifically tasked with advising us on clinical trials. This group includes experts with diverse backgrounds who provide input on a regular basis as we try to think through these issues. The starting point for optimizing our clinical trials enterprise was our FOA for multi-site clinical trials. And that is in large part because funding opportunity announcements essentially define NIH's expectations, not only for applications, but they also outline how those projects will be conducted, managed, what the review criteria are. And in particular, FOAs allow the agency and its investigators to develop a shared understanding of performance milestones and metrics that then will be used to manage and chart the progress on the trial. Tracking metrics and key milestones help investigators and the Institute know when the trial is on track and doing well, or conversely, facing some critical challenges and in the need of course correction or assistance. NHLBI staff are always poised to work with investigators to find solutions, and again, our shared goal is to keep trials on track and when they face problems, help get them back on track. The imminent expiration of the FOA under which we have historically funded our multi-site clinical trials in phase 2 and beyond presented us with a nice window of opportunity. An opportunity to take a look at how we solicit as well as review clinical trial applications, and also to explore some new approaches to enhancing the likelihood of trial success. Importantly, our experience with these multi-site clinical trial FOAs, including the feedback we'll get from you today and as we move forward, will inform how we apply a milestone-driven approach to our other clinical trial FOAs. Through the new milestone-driven approach, which you'll hear about in detail momentarily from my colleagues, we intend to work with you to increase the likelihood of trial success. And we hope that this approach will allow us to develop a shared set of expectations up front. This will include asking for the development of a project management or business plan, if you will, that will prospectively try to outline anticipated risks and address how those will be managed through the course of the trial. We also hope that this will facilitate peer review, not only of the scientific merit of the application, but also of its operational feasibility. We're also hopeful that this approach will allow us to mutually work together and identify problems that trials encounter early on, upstream, and facilitate working with you to address those problems. And under rare circumstances, if we reach the point of futility, for example, enable if that's necessary early termination of trials. I want to say up front that we don't in any way imagine these FOAs are a panacea for the challenges that trials face, not by any means, but we do think it's an important first step. And we also recognize that we can't hope to maximize the scientific and public health impact of our trials unless we have trials that are able to accrue and retain participants and meet other important milestones and come to a successful closeout. So at this juncture, I'll turn the proceedings over to my colleagues, and let me pass the microphone here. We'll begin with Dr. Glynn, and then Drs. Cope and Rosenberg will follow.
Well, thank you, Amy, and greetings, everyone. So I will be presenting on behalf of my colleagues some of the major elements of the new multi-site clinical trials funding opportunity announcements. So I will be going into more specifics. So the new funding opportunity announcements are targeted to phase 2 and above investigator-initiated multi-site clinical trials. And as you can see on the slide, they consist of 2 funding opportunity announcements that are linked and complement one another. So one of these funding opportunity announcements solicits the Clinical Coordinating Center application, and then the other companion funding opportunity announcement solicits the Data Coordinating Center application. And the award mechanisms that are used for both of these funding opportunity announcements are cooperative agreements to signify a partnership relationship between the investigators and us at NHLBI. The other thing you can see on this slide is that the Clinical Coordinating Center awards are actually under the form of a UG-free followed by a UH-free mechanism, while the Data Coordinating Center awards are under the form of a U24 award mechanism. So these funding opportunity announcements, just to clarify, do not pertain, though, to clinical trials that are single site, phase 1, so your first-in-human clinical trials. If you have a clinical trial that would be part of a small business application or part of a program project grant or PO1 application, or if it's a clinical trial that has been solicited through a specific RFA or RFP. So as Dr. Patterson said, NHLBI is interested in supporting studies that are high impact health-wise and also have a high likelihood of being successfully conducted on time and on budget. So essentially, we want your trials to be poised to be successful. So with that in mind, the application should address heart, lung, blood, or sleep scientific priorities, since these are the mission areas for the Institute, with the potential to change clinical practice and impact health, as well as demonstrate the operational feasibility of the project. So these applications should include performance milestones, those activities that need to be met for the project to be successful. And the application should also detail how you will meet those performance milestones and their timeline. So this information that you will be providing in the applications will then allow for both the science and the operational feasibility to be evaluated by peer review. So again, just to stress, one of the major key elements is that we are asking for 2 linked applications, one for the Clinical Coordinating Center and one for the Data Coordinating Center. The change in the new FOAs is that you can ask for up to 7-year phased awards with strong justification. So if we first look at the Clinical Coordinating Center application, you can see that the Clinical Coordinating Center first phase is supported by a UG-free award, which will be up to 1 year long and corresponds to the first year of the U-24 award for the Data Coordinating Center. And this first phase is used to finalize everything that you need to be able to enroll at least 1 participant by the end of that first phase. So things like finalizing the protocol, the consent forms, manual of operations, your case report forms, obtaining agreements and regulatory approvals, having the DSMB and IRB approve the protocol and consent forms, all of these things should be done in the UG-free phase. Then there will be an administrative review, probably with, in the, I would say, 9 months after the award is made in the UG-free phase, but it could be sooner depending on when you end your UG-free phase. And if good progress is demonstrated then and milestones are met, then there would be a transition to the second phase of the award, which is the UH-free phase of the award, which would start in the second year for the most part, which is the full enrollment and execution phase of your clinical trial. So this second phase would usually be expected to be about 4 years in length. So from your second year of the award to the 5th year, but you can ask for up to 6 years for the UH-free phase based on strong justification. Another major new element of the applications is that we're asking for coordinated submission of both the coordinating center for the Clinical Coordinating Center and the Data Coordinating Center project management plans. And these plans should describe how major aspects of the project will be managed to, again, ensure the success of the clinical trials so that you can complete your trial on schedule and within your budget. So in this project management plan, you should identify the project activities that are crucial to your project completion, explain the process to manage and coordinate those key project activities so that, again, you achieve successful completion of the study on time and on budget. So the plan should include who does what, when, and the effort associated with these activities, as well as the budget associated with the effort. The plan should outline the strategies to monitor the operational risks that you may encounter, proactively identify potential issues, and propose contingency plans. Other key elements of the new funding opportunity announcement is the fact that we're asking for detailed information upfront, including supporting data and processes for reaching key milestones within indicated timelines. So, for example, we're now going to be asking for you to provide a table that tells us what is going to be the accrual at each of the sites that are going to be participating. The peer review criteria have been modified in the new funding opportunity announcement so that now you will have rigorous evaluation at the time of review of not only the scientific impact of the project, but also its operational feasibility. Finally, another major overarching key element for these funding opportunity announcements is that for those trials using an FDA-regulated product and requiring an investigational new drug or an investigational device exemption application, we are asking for your grant application to include the evidence regarding the outcome of the communications that you would have had to already have with the FDA. So usually that would be the results of a pre-IND or pre-IDE meeting. And then if your application gets a meritorious score and is considered for a possible award, then we would be asking you to make sure that you submit the IND or the IDE application at least a month prior to a potential award so that we would have documentation of the FDA determination regarding the application before a possible award. So that will facilitate early identification of regulatory issues that you might have, and it may, for example, result in you changing slightly your milestones, for example, that you're proposing for the UG3 award. So now what I'm going to do is go into even more specifics, first starting with the Clinical Coordinating Center application. So the change in those new FOAs is that we are now requiring specific attachments that need to go with the Clinical Coordinating Center within the application. These attachments allow you to provide more information, which I think is a welcome change. They do not count against the 12-page limit. So you still have the 12-page limit for your research strategy, but you now have the space to provide much more information on your study design, which will provide essentially the reviewers a better chance of reviewing what you're asking. So the first attachment is the protocol synopsis, which can be up to 12 pages long, and essentially need to summarize the key elements of your trial design. The second attachment for the Clinical Coordinating Center application is the study organization plan, where you would describe your administrative structure, your staffing, communication plan between parties, committee structures like your steering committee, subcommittees, and any subcontractors that you might have. And that attachment can be up to 6 pages long. Then we have an attachment where you can describe your clinical trial experience in the last 5 years. Another attachment is the FDA plan. So essentially there you would describe the process to obtain the approvals, and then you would need to address those 2 elements that I mentioned before. And finally, the project management plan needs to be provided. It's up to 3 pages long, and again, it needs to address those elements that I mentioned before. What about the research strategy? This is something that is probably very well known to you. Not many changes there except for a couple of things that I will highlight. But essentially, you need to still address your significance, innovation, the approach that you're taking, You need to provide any supporting data that you might have already collected if you, let's say, had done a pilot clinical trial. And then in the experimental approach, you need to present your overall timeline, your study population, a description of your study design, and then a recruitment and a retention plan. So there, just to specify that now we're asking for two tables specifically. One where you would list the sites that have agreed to participate with the corresponding principal investigator. You would probably put your support letters, of course, in the appendix. And then the other table is an enrollment per site table where you would essentially present the information that justifies why you think you can essentially reach the sample size that you need for your clinical trial. So finally, a milestone plan specific for the UG3 phase, so that first year, that implementation phase, and for the UH3 phase, when you're conducting the full trial, needs to be provided. And again, your milestones are these major activities that need to be completed to implement and conduct the trial. And in the plan, you need to present the timeline. So when are you going to meet those milestones? And again, the processes for reaching those key milestones. Other specific elements to pay attention to for the Clinical Coordinating Center application is, and that was already the case before, you of course need to include a data and safety monitoring plan. And just to remind everyone, that plan needs to include the entities that will monitor the study, as well as the procedures to monitor study safety, minimize risks, maintain confidentiality of participant data, and how you will identify, review, and report adverse events and anticipated problems, or UPs. Another thing to keep in mind, because this is brand new, there is a new NIH policy that will be effective for applications that are received on or after May 25, 2017, so next year. And this requirement is that now you need to use a central IRB. So you can see on the slide there is the number of the notice, and I would strongly encourage you to read through that notice to have all the details about this new requirement. And then finally, you would need to include a resource sharing plan to let us know what data would be made available to the external community, and then what are your plans in terms of publishing and disseminating the results in a timely manner. So what about the Data Coordinating Center application? So again, the application is complementary to the clinical application. So for the Data Coordinating Center, we are asking only for two attachments. One is your project management plan specific for your activities at the Data Coordinating Center. And then the other one is relates to demonstrating your experience coordinating a clinical trial. In terms of a research plan, again, actually not much change except for the milestone plan. So you need to address significance, innovation, your approach, how you will coordinate the trial, the section on study design, the section on how you will manage the data and conduct your QC, a statistical analytical plan, and then what is then new is this milestone plan, which again needs to detail what kind of major activities need to be completed by the Data Coordinating Center in the preparation phase, so that first year of the award, and then in the full enrollment phase, starting in the second year of the U24 award. Other elements to know is that we are going to be asking for regular transfer of data to the NHLBI clinical trials database through tools provided by the Institute at the time of award. So, for example, we'll be asking for regular enrollment information. You need to include a resource sharing plan that tells us what data sets will be made available, and again, how you will support the publication and dissemination of results so that they are done in a timely fashion. And then usually the Data Coordinating Center is the one responsible for registering the clinical trial on clinicaltrials.gov, which is a requirement, so you need to do that, of course, provide any updates as necessary, and as you know now, you need to include the results for your primary outcome paper. So now Dr. Rosenberg will cover some of the questions that have been frequently raised by our investigator community. So Dr. Rosenberg.
Thank you, Simone. Good afternoon, everyone. So we have a list of questions that our investigators have already submitted to us, and we're going to go through some of those that have been asked more frequently. So first, we've been asked, what is the definition of a clinical trial according to the NIH? Well, we have a definition that qualifies it as any research study in which one or more human subjects are prospectively assigned to one or more intervention, which may include placebo or any other control. And these interventions are meant to evaluate the effects of those interventions on health-related biomedical or behavioral outcomes. In addition, we define a multi-site clinical trial as any trial that enrolls participants at 2 or more recruitment sites. So what's important in the definition that the multiplicity applies to the recruitment site. Second question is, how is phase 2 defined for the purpose of this FOA? Well, we define a phase 2 clinical trial as one that's been conducted to obtain preliminary data on the efficacy of a drug, device, biologic, or any other clinical intervention, as well as any trial that is designed to determine the common short-term side effects and risk associated with that intervention. In contrast, a trial that is introducing an agent into a human for the first time of a new indication that is aimed primarily at understanding the safety profile of an agent would be considered classically as a phase 1 rather than a phase 2 trial, and thus would not be responsive to this new multi-site effort. The next question that we've been asked is, what will be the new review criteria that will be used, or what change, how they will change? The new criteria that we'll use will articulate in peer review those that will help promote rigorous evaluation, not only of the study's scientific impact, but also of its operational feasibility. For the next set of questions, I will ask Dr. Cope to answer them. Dr. Cope?
Thank you, Yves. So one of the questions that we get is, will the pre-approval process change for applications with combined budget costs of greater than $500,000 direct costs in a given year? And the answer to that is no. If the combined direct costs of the DCC and CCC applications equal or exceed $500,000 in any one year, the investigator must still make contact with program staff to obtain documented approval in the form of a letter from the Institute stating it will accept the application for initial peer review. Another question related to this is whether the program staff will continue to hold consultations, and the answer is yes. We have a greater than 500K policy that has been on the website, and it doesn't change in response to the new FOAs. There will be a consultation with program staff, And investigators should also submit the letter of request to the relevant division director, and if the application is accepted, then they should append the corresponding letter of approval to cover the letter for this CCC and DCC applications independently. So this is all explained in the FOA, and it is clear that the letter of approval does need to be submitted in the cover letter component of the applications themselves. The question also gets to even if the combined costs for the budget being proposed does not meet or exceed the greater than $500,000 direct cost threshold, should applicants still contact NHLBI staff or program staff in order to discuss the submission of the applications? And the answer is yes. Please do intend to make further contact or and let your program officers know of your intent to submit a application response to these FOAs. There's also a letter of intent that will be requested a month prior to the submission of the application, and that is also discussed within the FOA itself. Some people want to know if they're already running a funded trial, are there new requirements that must be followed? And if you submit for renewal under an active award that you've been conducting as a trial, then the new FOA's requirements will apply, and you would apply to these new FOAs. But otherwise, any ongoing trial is just subject to the original terms and of the notice of grant award. At this juncture, we're going to begin with the question-answer session. Amola, can you review the procedure for submitting questions once again?
Sure. As noted earlier, we anticipate participants will have many questions. We will address them approximately in order of receipt, but we will give priority to new topics not raised by previous questions. Selected questions will be read out loud, and panelists will answer them orally. We'll collect all remaining questions and use them to update our frequently asked questions. All registrants will be notified of their availability. To submit your question, please type into the Q&A box on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Type your question into the box and select all panelists from the drop-down menu to submit. And now back to Dr. Patterson.
Okay. Thank you, Amola. Give us 1 minute here where a number of questions have been coming in. Let's see, Carrie, I think this first one might be going to you. It's from a listener who's putting together an application for a Phase 2 multi-site trial. And they plan on submitting the application after this summer's submission date, and they'd like to know if they should follow the old FOA or the new ones. And I think actually this question is a bit related to the topic you just covered, but
yeah,
take that one.
Thank you. Yeah, the current PAR 13-128 is going to expire as of the last AIDS deadline in September. So the last non-AIDS deadlines for any applications that may have been outstanding that are resubmissions to be submitted are actually July 5. And so if submitting after that date, any new, basically any new applications have to come in with the new cooperative agreement FOAs and compliant to those FOAs.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Carrie. Looks like we've gotten a couple of questions from listeners who'd like to know what criteria will be used when making determinations regarding that critical transition from the UG3 to the UH3 award. And some of the specific questions under this sort of general heading are, what are the minimal requirements to be eligible for this transition? Who will make the determination? And at what point during the UG3 award will that determination be made? See, Simone, I think maybe we'll direct this one to you.
Sure. So as I mentioned, at least 2 administrative reviews will be conducted. So the first administrative review would usually occur about 9 months into the UG3 phase, and then the second review probably about a year or 2 into the UH3 phase. So what we would be asking when we're ready for those reviews is to ask you, the TCC and DCC, to put together a short report detailing the progress that you've made in achieving the milestones that everyone agreed upon. And then if you had encountered any problems, to detail what actions have been taken, and then to specify whether or not this essentially impacted your timeline to meet any of those milestones. So then this information will be reviewed by NHLBI, including the program officer working with you on the trial, who is, most familiar with the work, and then a decision will be made in terms of going on to the next phase.
Okay, well, thank you, Simone. We have another question here. This listener wants to know whether applicants may include in their UG3, UH3 application a proposal for pilot study that they would be conducting during the UG3 phase. Let's see, Yves, may I ask you to take this one?
Sure, Amy. The answer is no. The UG3, UH3 mechanism is not intended to support pilot studies. As was mentioned by Simone, pilot data are to be included in the application in the research strategy as they currently are now. We also have a separate funding mechanism for pilot studies, that is R34 mechanism. However, you can use the UG3 phase, the planning phase, to refine study procedures such as imaging, clinical assessments, laboratory tests, etc., to support the study design that you plan to use that is already based on appropriate pilot data.
All right, thank you, Yves. We have another question. This listener wants to know if they revised their application and submitted as a new application under the new FOAs, do they need to submit another letter of approval? So, Carrie, can you respond to that?
This question is in reference to there's the requirement that we have the consultation with NHLBI and obtain the letter of approval as identified before under the 500K, over the 500K process. If they will be resubmitting their application for the new FOAs, the investigator should make contact with the NHLBI program officer and initiate the procedure for having a new record in order to get another letter of approval that they can then resubmit with the new FOAs and their application. So we definitely strongly encourage anybody who has been approved previously to initiate that process in order to submit their new applications for an over $500,000 in any given year application.
Okay, all right. The next question is, looks like on a somewhat related point. Special submission and review requirements apply to large applications proposing annual direct cost budgets in excess of $1.5 million in any 1 year. This listener wants to know, are those requirements changing at all under the new FOA? Carrie, can I turn to you for that one?
Sure. No, that process too, similar to the greater than 500K threshold, NHLBI speaks of on the web page a PPG cap limitation as well, and those dates are two specific dates in the year that letters of request can be submitted for, and those letters of request will also be in effect. The requirement for those letters of request for those particular dates will also be in effect under this new FOA.
Great. We have a question from a listener about the new NIH policy that Simone mentioned in her presentation on the use of single IRBs. And this listener wants to know how that factors into expectations for NHLBI trials. So, well, I've been doling out questions to everybody else. I think maybe it's my turn to take a crack at one of these. So I'll take this one. So on June 21st of this year, as Simone said, NIH issued a new policy. It's entitled Policy on the Use of a Single IRB for Multi-Site Research. And that new policy articulates the NIH-wide expectation that a single IRB, also called a central IRB, would be established as the official IRB or the IRB of record for conducting reviews of multi-site research protocols. This would apply to all multi-site research protocols funded by NIH that involve human subjects. It applies to research funded by any and all of the NIH institutes, including, of course, NHLBI. The overarching goal of that policy is to try to streamline IRB review, which is, I think, everybody participating today understands is a major challenge sometimes, is certainly a major milestone in getting a trial moving forward. So the policy aims at making that process more efficient overall, and it's actually in keeping with what are the anticipated changes in the regulatory framework governing human subjects research writ large, otherwise referred to as the common rule, and many of you may have seen or reviewed or heard of the proposed revisions to the common rule, and we anticipate that that will be issued in final form later this year. And as Simone also mentioned, this new NIH policy requiring use of a single IRB or central IRB for multi-site projects involving human subjects doesn't actually take effect until May 25th of next year. So practically speaking, what that means is that only applications involving multi-site clinical research received before May 25th, rather on or after May 25th, need to propose a single IRB. If you're submitting prior to that date, you are not, strictly speaking, required to propose the usage of a single IRB. However, I'd like to note that the new FOAs encourage the use of a single or central IRB out of acknowledgement or recognition that doing so can often streamline and accelerate the launch of a trial. At a later date, we'll be amending the FOAs to make this a requirement in keeping with the overarching NIH policy, and that becomes effective. Okay, so I've been handed a couple more questions here. And we have a few listeners who've asked questions that fall under the same general topic, which is why are we making this change to our multi-site clinical trials? What's the problem we're trying to fix? And I think this is a really important issue for us to explain and to help our audience understand. Simone, can I turn to you to address this?
Sure. So I think, yes, we agree that, of course, this is a really important matter for us to communicate. So NHLBI has an important stewardship responsibility to ensure that the Institute invests wisely in clinical trials that are well-designed and likely to come to a productive conclusion. So we are working to facilitate the sound design and conduct of trials so that essentially the benefits of research can be realized and translated into meaningful improvements in healthcare in as timely a way as possible, and we all want the same thing. So what we've done is we've carefully analyzed, as Amy said in her presentation, the characteristics of trials. And essentially, we wanted to know what kind of elements typically lead to a successful conclusion and productivity versus what are the common challenges that are encountered, and how can we mitigate those. And some of those challenges, again, Amy mentioned them, might be difficulty securing the contracts or the regulatory approvals that are needed, or often difficulty with timely recruitment or with enrolling a sufficient number of participants. And sometimes we unfortunately have seen trials that have either not resulted in any publication or have published quite late. So a new approach with those new FOAs entails, as we've mentioned, the careful consideration of milestones and metrics of success. And the idea there is that, again, we want to facilitate the efficient conduct of our trials by defining what those milestones are, how you're going to meet them, and your timeline in advance that will facilitate the successful conduct of the trials.
All right. Thank you, Simone. One of our listeners indicates they're listening in from Canada, and they're wondering whether Canadian institutions are eligible to apply for the CCC and DCC awards under these FOAs. Simone, can you answer that?
Sure. So as is indicated on the funding opportunity announcements, you'll see that the institutions outside the United States are eligible to apply for the Clinical Coordinating Award, but not for the Data Coordinating Center Award. However, it is okay if you are a non-U.S. component, that it gets complicated, of a U.S. institution, then you can apply for a Data Coordinating Center Award. We're still looking at all the questions, so.
Yeah, there are lots of really good questions, so thank all of you. I know I'm probably not going to have time to get to all of them, but we will certainly try. So here's a question from a listener that's concerned that the new approach has the potential to be quite burdensome on investigators as they prepare their applications, and especially given the additional information and the pre-planning that is expected. Carrie, can you respond to that?
Sure. So we do hope that in the long run, this approach will actually reduce burden on investigators, because the effort and time that one invests up front should result in encountering fewer problems during the conduct of the trials, and will make better applications that can be more effectively reviewed as well. We do anticipate investigators, hopefully will encounter fewer delays and spend less time troubleshooting, finding ad hoc ways to address many roadblocks that can occur in conducting the trial. Then I think really from the public stewardship point of view, it's the right thing to do. It will certainly help NHLBI's decision-making by providing a more informed basis for making determinations and about the funding following peer review, and about whether to continue trials that are, laboring or proving to no longer be feasible operationally. There's been a lot of discussion, and also with our outside working groups, that this is a new way of doing business. That's why we're conducting this webinar. We intend to post information in the facts webpage and on other information to help investigators in the NHLBI website. As we move forward, we will consider the need for additional webinars or technical workshops as well to help formulate a sufficient level of understanding of the need and what we can do to further this enterprise. And you should also feel free, of course, program officers ask all the time for more upfront contact to discuss questions that you have well before you get to the phase where you're even contemplating submitting the applications. So that stands true in this matter as well.
Thank you, Carrie. One of our listeners is running a trial, already funded, and they're wondering if they'll have to submit any new information or adhere to the new oversight requirements under these FOAs. Eve, could we turn to you for that?
Oh, sure. A very quick answer. If you submit for renewal, then you'll have to submit to the new requirement of the new FOA. That's all. Otherwise, you just have to be following the notice of grant award that apply to the trial. That's all.
Okay. Eve, while I have your attention, we have a question that's come in. Actually, it's the most frequently asked questions during this session. And several listeners want to know, does NIH require the CCC and DCC to be located at two physically distinct or different places? And how much overlap is allowed if, for example, the current setting is not distinctively separated within the organization?
Sure. Very good question. And we've been asked this question many times against for the current FOA, for multi-center clinical trials. So there's no NHLBI requirement that your CCC and DCC be at two physically different places where there are different institutions or different departments within the same institution. However, what we require for you to document is what firewalls you will implement to separate the DCC from the CCC. So obviously, the less physical separation you have between the two, the more documentation will require to prove that your DCC and CC operations are really separated. So if you have your DCC program manager in the desk in front of the CCC program manager, that may be an issue, and we'll ask you a little more separation than that. I hope that answers your question, but I'm happy to follow up.
Okay. A listener noted that the new FOAs require submission of a clinical protocol synopsis as part of the application. And they'd like to know if they can simply append the full protocol and then, sort of cross-reference appropriate sections instead of preparing this synopsis. Carrie, can you answer that one?
Yeah, this has been considered very carefully. So the protocol synopsis provides the information essential to the evaluation of the application, and therefore it's being requested as the 12-page attachment that Simone described. Then, in addition, you can include in the application, as it is now as a part of the appendices, a clinical protocol, full protocol, should you want that to be a part of the application, potentially for peer review. But it's important to note that that appendices are not required to be reviewed. So that's why the synopsis is a part of the application. Simply appending the full protocol is not going to the same as providing the clinical synopsis, and the applications that lack a clinical synopsis will not be moved forward to review. You may choose to also provide the protocol, of course, but that's with basically keeping in mind that the may not be evaluated by peer review, but the synopsis will be.
Okay. Thanks, Carrie. Actually, this question is related to another one that we received asking about the protocol synopsis, and wanting to know, is it the same thing as the research strategy, and how does the experimental approach of the research strategy differ from the protocol synopsis? And Simone, I'm wondering if I can turn to you for that.
Sure. So the research strategy, so you have 12 pages to address all of these elements that I mentioned in my presentation for the research strategy. So you do not have the space in your research strategy to really go into detail about, the elements of the protocol. So I think about the protocol synopsis as a mini protocol, essentially, and it can be, so you have up to 12 pages. In your protocol synopsis, you need to cover the objectives, the study design, the intervention to be tested, the primary and important secondary endpoints. You need to provide the schedule for the clinical and laboratory evaluations, a quite lengthy description of your study population, your enrollment sites, again, statistical design and power, your group assignments, your subject participation, duration, and the whole study duration. So I'm thinking about the protocol synopsis again as a mini protocol where you can provide much more detail that you would be able to provide in the as part of the experimental approach in the research strategy. And again, the protocol synopsis will be reviewed by the external reviewers. And as Carrie said, although you're welcome to attach a full lengthy protocol at the end in the appendix, we're not sure that the reviewers would read it. While they will have to review the protocol synopsis that you provide.
All right, Simone, thank you. We have another question. Someone has recently had a project reviewed under an R34 mechanism at NHLBI that they believe would also fit under this mechanism, although it would need to be expanded to have additional sites and broader scope. And they want to know if they would be eligible to apply for this award. Carrie, can you take that?
Okay. So the R34 clinical trial pilot study funding opportunity announcement is intended to provide the necessary and sufficient data to conduct a trial like this. So those aims that are in an R34 are kind of directly precedent to being able to go forward with a larger trial such as this. So if, in other words, if you were ready to put that trial into this cooperative agreement FOA, then the R34 wouldn't be necessary. The R34 really serves a different purpose.
Thanks, Carrie. Another listener wonders why the project management plan is being required as part of the submission. Eve, could you take that one?
Sure. Well, if you run industry-funded trials, that wouldn't be something new to you. That's a requirement in most business now to have a project management plan. And that applies, in our experience, to the success of running large multi-site trials. Those require more than outstanding clinical and scientific skills. It does require project management and business skills. So that's why we now require it. We think it's a tool that will facilitate the management and success of the trials by having the investigator anticipate problems that could arise and set up systems to deal with some of those problems and challenges that they may encounter. So we want to make sure that the application addresses those elements.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Eve. A listener wanted to clarify whether UG3 and UH3 phases might be adjusted with strong justification but need to stay overall at 7 years. In other words, could the UG3 or UH3 phases be prolonged using no-cost extensions with justification with an overall award period of 7 years? So, Simone, could you address the sort of, I think the overall issue is the time frame here that's allowed.
Right. So So the answer to the specific question is no, because the UG3 phase can only be up to 1 year. So when you apply for your clinical trial, it really needs to be ready to be implemented within 1 year so that towards the end of that year, you are able to enroll at least one participant. And then the UH3 phase would start in the second year and then can be, again, go until for a period of 6 years total, so that you have your 1 year for the UG3 and then a maximum of 6 years for the UH3, so that total you can request 7 years with strong justification. But the only one essentially that is subject to, but is flexible in terms of the amount of time that you can ask for is the UH3 phase, because most of you would be able to finish the project probably within, 4 years. But again, you can ask for a UH3 of 6 years duration.
Thank you, Simone. While I have your attention, Simone, there's another question that has come in about why the IND must be filed before receiving the UG3 award from NHLBI.
Okay, sure. So, well, first, again, this requirement is only that the IND be filed. It doesn't have to be approved. So the idea there is that it allows both you and us to receive critical feedback from the FDA and essentially assures that no major regulatory hurdle exists that would prevent you from meeting the expected milestones, again, of that first participant, at least by the end of the UG3 phase. So if FDA were to ask for significant additional research, then this would be important to know, because it probably would indicate that your trial is not ready yet for submission. On the other hand, if minor changes are required that in all likelihood you can address in the UG3 phase, then we would work to essentially change slightly those milestones to address that. And indeed, a reason for the UG3 phase is that you can use that to continue your discussions with the FDA and essentially finalize your regulatory approvals, assuming, again, the comments that you had received were relatively minor and therefore addressable within that year of the UG3.
Thank you, Simone. We're getting the signal from our IT folks that we probably need to wrap up, and I know we've gone over our allotted time today, and we appreciate everyone's patience and hanging in there with us. We have received many questions, far more than we were able to address one by one today. Please know that all of the questions that were submitted are nonetheless going to be useful and will actually greatly inform the development of future frequently asked questions that will be posted on the website. In addition, as we read through and digest the questions that have come in, we'll address the need to whether another one of these sessions might be useful to the community. We'll also be posting the slides as well as a recording of this webinar in case you'd like to reference or review them in the future or share it with some of your colleagues who were not able to attend today. We'll also be notifying you by email about the availability of these materials, so you don't need to keep checking back on the website. You'll get an email from us letting you know and very shortly when these are posted. And then finally, if you have questions, comments, or suggestions that you'd like to send to us after this session, you may do so by sending them to the email address shown on the screen. OCTET, by the way, stands for Optimizing the Clinical Trial Enterprise Team. And in the meantime, we thank all of you for participating today, for spending this time with us, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.